So the cloud and availability. So most of my time is spent in the cloud. The last 2 years I've been evangelizing about Microsoft Azure. And I've been having similar conversations about AWS and other cloud solutions as well, and platforms that sit on, and products that sit on top of these clouds. What I'm seeing in the SMB world, which is my market, is that online backup and disaster recovery as a service are the two hot technologies, the two hot solutions. I'm not seeing a whole lot of people deploying virtual machines in the cloud just to have virtual machines in the cloud. It does happen, but it's the minority of cases. Online backup is something that SMBs already understand, and it's something they want to use and leverage, especially that disk to cloud solution, where they're able to pick a good local backup solution and extend its functionality into the cloud for long-term retention. Disaster recovery gives them the ability to do a business requirement that's affordable. They've never been able to do, or it's been too expensive to do in the past. This has all been driven by needs that have always been there. The fact that these technologies are affordable, and best of all, for the staff who are stressed out, who are running around like crazy trying to figure out how to get the boss's printer unjammed and working again while trying to deploy software to get Office 2003 removed and replaced with Office 2016. This stuff is easy to use, and it saves you time, and it makes your life easier. And in the end, isn't that what you want when you're working in IT in a small, medium business? A nice, easy life. And I think, we have a few more slides. Issue 5, innovation. I was in a situation where we were stuck using an old version of virtualization. And the reason was the backup product, the yellow box backup product that we were using, did not support the version of virtualization we wanted to move to. And after 2 years of waiting, we gave up. And that's, unfortunate. Now, you might say the small, medium business, we're not as aggressive at changing technology as the Fortune 500s. That's actually a lie. What I have found is that the SMB is more agile than those large aircraft carriers that are the Fortune 500s. Microsoft and Apple and all those, they might scream and talk about and write case studies about the Fortune 500s and make proclamations about 10 million PCs being migrated by next January and all that sort of thing. Realistically, it's the SMB that moves more quickly. They're the ones that embraced Office 365. They're the ones that are racing to Azure and AWS more rapidly than their bigger cousins. We might hear stories about purchases, but the big guys might make those purchases, but they may not actually use. But the SMB is a quicker user of these technologies because they see the value of technology and what it can do to enable the business and revolutionize the business. The challenges are the legacy backup vendors and DR vendors out there, the guys who've been around since the 90s, they hold you back. They slow you down. They say, well, we'll support that version, but we're not sure what it is we'll be able to support in there. You don't really need live migration or vMotion, do you? You may have invested in that cluster, but yeah, we're not going to be able to support that. Or, yeah, we support that, but if you do it, something weird might happen. And that's the sort of statement I've gotten from some of those vendors of the past. Those companies that take 2 years to support Windows Server 2012, or the job engine fails 3 times a week. The sort of companies I'm talking about. And these are the sort of solutions that, unfortunately, same old IT keep buying. The boss always bought it, so we keep buying it. Unfortunately, the IT expert in this case situation really needs to be the expert and give feedback to their boss, their employer, and say, this isn't necessarily the right thing for us. We could be doing so much more if we, make a different decision and look at the financial benefits of doing it, not just on the sticker price, but on the total cost of ownership and the ability to compete and be flexible. So get rid of that same old IT. Start to innovate. Look for new alternatives that allow you to do things in different ways. Don't say, well, we've always used tapes, so we're always going to use tapes. That's not necessarily a great way. We can start doing short-term retention on cheap RAID file storage or storage basis, and long-term retention on ultra-cheap storage in the cloud that's just going to be there with an SLA. Use technologies that are designed for the way we work, designed for virtualization, designed for cloud computing, and therefore are going to be more reliable. Simplify your life. Automate. Give you errors, When there's an exception, don't go looking for reports when backers have succeeded. That should be just accepted. It should be taken for granted. Find new ways of buying these services and solutions so you're not making that big bang up front that then holds the business back. When you go to the drip feed model, you're more flexible, you're not locked into anything, you're able to change your mind, you're able to take advantage of the latest solutions right now. And find those providers, those software developers, those service providers that are quick to innovate. When you go to a new version of vSphere or Hyper-V, they're quick to give you support, not just in months, but I'm talking about days or weeks. Those are the sort of companies to look at, and not the ones who talk about how successful they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Look for who's successful now. Look for who's growing now. Look for the ones that are talking the talk and are doing the things that you want to be able to do in the future, but do it now.
All right, I'm going to jump in here real quick before Drew takes over. If you have any questions, we've already gotten a couple. Please just type them in, and Aidan and Drew will address them at the end. So without further ado, we will pass it back over to Drew.
Thanks very much. Let's see here what we have. Oh, that's a little bit about me, but I know we're running on some time here, so I want to go ahead and get right into it. So, of course, my name, folks, is Drew Kessel, and we want to talk today about Veeam Availability Suite and really the story of Veeam Availability Suite and how that can really help to address challenges that small businesses are facing. So, you know, obviously we've recently released our Veeam Availability Suite. You can see several different features that we introduced throughout the process of kind of announcing that product. And of course, you could kind of take a look at some things that we've done to kind of provide new functionality. And we're going to talk to sort of where some of these things come into play as a function of this conversation. So just to give you guys a feel for, you know, innovations that are continuing to happen for us as we, you know, continue to continue to grow here. But from an agenda perspective, if we can get these slides to stay on track there we go. From an agenda perspective, we want to talk about the following challenges. We want to talk a little bit about TCO, right? And I think some of these things are going to overlap with some things that Aidan talked about, which is great. But, you know, we're going to talk about TCO a little bit. We're going to talk about ease of use, right? You guys want a solution that's typically going to be something that is easy to work with. Of course, data recoverability is very important. The cloud is a big part of all of the stories these days, so we're going to talk a little bit about the cloud. And, of course, we're going to talk about continued innovation for SMBs and how some of those features that we just showed on that last screen really have been innovations that are going to benefit the SMB. And we'll try to have some time for some Q&A here for you as well. So with that, of course, challenge number one, total cost of ownership. When you think about TCO, you need to think about more than, of course, just the upfront purchase, more than even just the perpetual license cost, right? It's about the time and people resources associated with these situations. Think about, you know, how long is it going to take us to get up and running? So how long is it going to take me to download, install, potentially tinker with the solution? How long is it going to take us to convert legacy processes? This is a big thing too. If we're used to using a legacy solution, if we're used to, for instance, maybe deploying a bunch of agents, if we're used to maybe having to rely on tape, versus maybe we're looking at a situation where we want to move into a more modern disk-to-disk solution, a solution that, you know, doesn't require sort of the high level of complexity associated with managing agents and things like that. Then, of course, total cost of ownership there, getting up and running, just changing those processes a little bit is something that is a part of the equation. Now, obviously, day-to-day management is a big part of the equation as well. So how much time do you spend today on scheduling and checking your backup jobs? You know, Aidan talked earlier about, you know, looking for at reports of seeing successful backups. Successful backups should be the norm, right? We should be doing failure reporting. We should be understanding when failures are happening and understanding that, you know, monitoring and management, testing backups can happen automatically instead of as a function of some manual process that might be taking up your time on the weekend when you could be doing something more important, more personal perhaps. Now, of course, from a perspective of total cost of ownership, another sort of consideration is that constant shift that companies and IT environments are recognizing that, we can take more of an OpEx approach, right? We can potentially have a subscription service limiting the upfront risk by leveraging those subscription models. So, of course, Veeam is adapting to those types of situations. So there are CapEx and OpEx opportunities there to kind of take care of those different types of situations so that you can potentially move that into an OpEx scenario when the need arises to do that. Now, of course, what type of off-site infrastructure do you need, right, to rent or build? What type of infrastructure? So the question there is really, if you're going to off-site your data, that's a big part of the consideration, but maybe we want to use co-location services. Maybe we want to use the cloud. We're obviously going to talk more about the cloud as a part of this conversation, but that's a big part of the consideration, right? I can't go and ask for a new site all the time. Sometimes I may be able to get with some co-location provider, a managed service provider. I may be able to leverage the cloud in a more public way. Oftentimes, building off-site infrastructure is a big part of TCO that we might want to sort of leverage in a different way with things like infrastructure as a service and disaster recovery as a service opportunities that exist today. Outside help. We talked earlier, Aiden mentioned, when do we have time to learn all this stuff, right? Sometimes we just don't have time to learn all this stuff. So part of the total cost of ownership of really any solution is, what assistance do we need with understanding the product? What assistance do we need with configuring the product? Do we need consulting? Do we need service providers as a part of this process, as a part of the equation to make sure that this stuff is kind of well taken care of? And, of course, we want to mention to sort of be wary of capacity-based pricing. So capacity-based pricing, the challenge with capacity-based pricing, of course, is that, data grows, right? And we're going to talk about that in a little more detail here as we kind of present some information on that. So you can see here, data is growing at 30 to 50% a year. Now, obviously, in year one, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's, okay, the sort of capacity-based licensing can be cost-effective, and it kind of makes sense. But what if in year 3, we're paying quite a bit more? In year 5, we're paying even more at a capacity perspective, simply because we have to worry about the amount of terabytes of storage that we're covering as a function of that situation. Now, of course, the cost of downtime and the cost of lost data are really important considerations as well. So imagine just as a very simple example, right? Even if you can't fully quantify it, right? It's not always necessarily a good opportunity to kind of take all of that data and put it into a bunch of spreadsheets, because then people are going to get bogged down in where did you get those numbers? Where did this information come from? But what if you could just take a very simple example? Imagine you're a sales organization, even just a small sales organization. You have 10 sales reps, and those 10 sales reps make 10 phone calls an hour. If our CRM is down for an hour, the company's missing out on 100 potential touch points in just that hour's time frame. So that's a lot of just quantitative loss that you can put out there without having to get into specifics of figures. They can put the figures behind that quantitative loss, so to speak. So challenge number 2, ease of use. This is a big part of the Veeam story and always kind of has been from day one. So we want to provide you with ease of use features, really implementing those ease of use features into the technology. So obviously, as a small business, we understand that pretty much everybody in this audience is probably wearing a lot of hats. That guy's wearing quite a few hats. You might be walking into a boardroom talking about a big data center investment, might be talking about some large infrastructure upgrade, and then you might walk out of that meeting and go dig out some Exchange emails or go fix a printer or whatever the case may be. So it's important to pay attention to complexity as a potential challenge and perhaps ease of use as a potential solution to those types of challenges. So we did some surveys, right? And what we found here this is from a Gartner survey here, is that more than half of administrators are concerned about the complexity of managing backup. That's a problem, right? So we want to make sure that that complexity is not a huge part of the equation. Now, Veeam did some survey information, did some surveying as well. So it's not just about simple UI. It's about product reliability. So, for instance, is data actionable? Is backup recoverable? Can you get granular data that you actually need? So we did a survey, and what we found is among customers, what's most important to them and where Veeam differentiates, far and away, reliability was the most important thing for customers, and that Veeam did very well in relation to its customers. So ease of use and reliability as a function of that is something that we can pretty effectively address in that spectrum. So data recoverability is one of those challenges that the SMB has that really is a cornerstone of why they're going to invest in an availability strategy like Veeam backup and replication in the first place. So if we think about that, the conversation sort of naturally shifts to recoverability, right? So with that being said, we can take a look at the length of time it takes to restore virtual machines and things like that. But when we say recovery, we mean getting something back when something doesn't go as expected. The expectations on the data center are very high today. I would argue that they're higher in the SMB. The SMB, the IT professional usually has a direct connection to other business decision makers. These connections are deep and visible, right? You see these people day in, day out. IT is not just siloed off somewhere on an island, right, where you're mysteriously behind the curtain. You're looking face-to-face with those business owners, and the expectation is we have to get this done. We have to get it done right and quickly. So we have some analyst data, right? So the expectation here is, the information here is essentially, what's your expectation about how your organization will recover virtual machines from a time perspective? So you can see 8% of these folks, less than 15 minutes. 25% expect about a 15 to 1 hour recovery time. Those numbers are pretty reasonable. But where it gets a little more disturbing is in the space of, hey, we're going to expect an hour to 2 hours, 2 hours to 4 hours, or even don't know, right? I have no idea how long it's going to take me to recover data. That's pretty disturbing, because if you're an administrator and you don't know how long it's going to take you to recover your information, that's something that we need to possibly do some testing on to understand what those processes are going to look like. So why should recovery tasks really be any different than the amount of time it takes to deploy a new VM, right? And that's why we want to simplify that recovery scenario for you. So with that being said, it is, of course, all about recovery. And in that, it's all about recovery, and yet recovery expectations within SMBs are the same as those in large enterprises. So recovery expectations, little or no data loss. That 92% of people are not meeting that expectation have really lowered their expectation. At Veeam, we focus on less than 15 minutes for all applications of data. So it's not just bringing back a virtual machine. It's granular technologies like Exchange, Active Directory, SQL, Oracle, and of course file-level restores and things of that nature. So challenge number 4, let's take advantage of the cloud. When we say cloud, what exactly does that mean? As Aidan said, everybody has a different marketing definition for what the cloud means. Everyone immediately thinks of hyper-public clouds. Some household names like Azure, AWS, things of that nature. Everyone automatically thinks about some of those lower cost storage options. But what I want to do today is encourage you to think of the cloud as a collection of cloud and service provider technologies that are going to be used to extend your availability to these resources in a native way, perhaps combining compute and storage. So this is an advantage and a strategy. This is an easy way for SMB to solve availability challenges. So, for instance, taking advantage of the cloud. Now, obviously, this is set for enterprise information, but I think you'll find that a lot of the SMB spaces are going to be very simple. right? By 2018, 50% of enterprises' data will reside external to the data center, up from 15% today. So important to note, it doesn't just say super public clouds, but just outside of the data center. One way to leverage these technologies, of course, is to use them as backup as a storage. Take a look at Azure alone. So Azure obviously made a 15+ billion investment in their data center. They host over 1 million servers in those data centers and have over 30 trillion objects. So that's a lot of data, that's a lot of objects that are already out there, and that type of information is only going to continue to grow over the next 2 years. Yet, almost 40% of businesses don't send their backups off-site. So that's just from a closed survey that we did, but I think that you'll find that across the industry, there are lots of folks who don't have off-site redundancy. We're not following the 3-2-1 rule of having 3 copies of your backup, 2 of them on separate media, and 1 of them being off-site. So we want to take advantage of those cloud technologies that are there. So the question is, where does Veeam take advantage of those cloud technologies? So when you look at the cloud, again, encourage you to think of that in context of that 3-2-1 rule that I mentioned there. So basically, that we have that rule in place that's going to allow you to take advantage of redundancy, right? The rule is great because it doesn't lock you into any specific technology, but it addresses most situations. It addresses a high level of availability and redundancy. Offsite could be tape, could be backups stored offsite in another data center, a replicated virtual machine, some sort of storage snapshot, or a backup or replica held at a service provider. The last is a scenario where we have service providers acting as a Veeam backup repository. You can even encrypt this data, right? So falling in line with that trust no one encryption that Aidan talked about earlier, Veeam backup and replication is going to put you in a position where you are the person who has the key to decrypt your data. So you don't have to share that responsibility with anyone else. Of course, when we think about taking advantage of the cloud, backup as a service is a big part of that conversation, but DR as a service, this is an increasing part of that conversation. It's an OpEx way to have infrastructure available in the midst of a potential disaster scenario. So we don't have to build out a colo. We don't have to build out a secondary location and spend thousands of billions of dollars on infrastructure. We can simply leverage those infrastructures that already exist from a cloud perspective, from a service provider perspective. So not only does Veeam provide that framework to do backup as a service through our Cloud Connect platform, but also replicate those virtual machines, truly replicating from one host to another, providing you yet another way to ensure redundancy and ensure the availability of your virtual machines and that data within those virtual machines whenever those types of disaster scenarios might occur. Now, challenge number 5, we wanted to kind of make this specific to SMBs, right? So the questions, from an SMB perspective, what has Veeam done for you lately? So that's a fair question. You know, our message has very recently taken a large step toward addressing the enterprise, but it's really important for us to not forget our roots. So a recent Spiceworks discussion gave SMB users an opportunity to discuss this at length. And of course, definitely recommend to kind of check that out. But we're going to talk through some specific features, some features that we've built into the software that we think are features that can benefit the SMB. So for instance, replication enhancements. We can build replicas from a backup, taking a backup and then taking a replica. Normally that would be 2 different jobs, both of which are accessing production data. The idea of sourcing a replica from a backup allows us to only have to read the production storage once. The takeaway here is that you can cut your backup window in half if you need both backups and replicas. Planned failover and failover plans give the SMB a really good way to manage a disaster event with ease. WAN acceleration's even going to help with those LAN low bandwidth connections. Now, of course, from a primary storage perspective, for those of us who might have HP Store Virtual, 3PAR, VNX, VNXE, NetApps, right? Explorer from Storage Snapshots is going to give you enterprise-level availability for the SMB, and that's available in all editions. Encryption. protecting that data. Security is ever increasingly important as more and more of us see those attacks, those crypto lockers and things like that that are taking place. So of course, encryption's been requested for a long time. It's going to ensure that your backup data is secure. Software even has a built-in lost password mechanism. Now, obviously, we talked earlier about granular restores and how the software can help with that. We do have that capability from SQL to Oracle to Active Directory to Exchange to even some specific things around physical devices, right? So Veeam has always been virtual, but we now have Veeam Endpoint Backup Free, which allows you to protect desktops, protect laptops, and those workstations that maybe it's that executive level, that CIO, that CEO wants you to protect his laptop. Endpoint Backup is going to do that. Coming this year, we'll also be adding Veeam Backup for Linux. For those of you who might have some Linux servers in the equation, we're going to take care of that stuff for you as well. Of course, we added direct NFS capability. BitLooker is a selective exclusion engine that allows you to do file-level exclusions. It's very uncommon for an image-based solution to be able to handle that, but we cracked that code open and took care of that capability, so you can now exclude files from an image-based backup, reducing the backup windows and reducing what's being backed up. It's also controlling dirty blocks for improvements in efficiencies in the backup process even further. Robo enhancements for those of us who have multiple offices, multiple sites. You can design a Veeam installation with more granularity. We introduced 2 new roles to help with that. A mount server and a guest interaction proxy means faster backups and recoveries when you design with a central console, as well as enhancements for deduplication environments. So those of you who have dedupe appliances who want to see better performance from those types of situations, we're going to have that well covered for you also. I believe that's my last slide there, so perhaps turn it back over.
There we go. Well, thank you, everybody. We do have a couple questions that came in here, and I believe there's at least one for each of you. So, Aiden, the first one that was asked to you, it says, Disk X is a great concept, but what do you do when a regulatory requirement prevent cloud as an option? Is there no second location or other than tape?
Thanks, Brad. So disk to cloud, as Drew has mentioned, doesn't necessarily require one of the big 3 where most of the concern is, especially outside of the United States. There are always local cloud operators. And I'm in the European Union, so I'm fully familiar with all the complexities of that. So, for example, a German company doesn't want to host anything with a non-German owned data center. And there are plenty of German data centers who offer services through that, and I'm sure there are plenty of those who are running Veeam's Cloud Connect, for example, in Germany. And you'll find that throughout the world. There are plenty of local, whether they be large or small, hosted companies or hosting companies. They might be your typical Microsoft partner who's selling your PCs and your occasional server. They might be a very large service provider, but they're locally owned and locally operated. And that does change the whole conversation about regulations. But do have a look into what the real regulations are for your industry and for your country. There's a lot of mythology out there. Some of it is true, some of it is made up, and it's just fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So look and talk to the company's solicitor or lawyer, find out what is actually genuinely applicable for your company and for your industry, and then seek out the alternatives. They are out there.
Cool, great, thank you. This one is for Drew. It says you talked a lot about virtual machines, but does Veeam handle, let's see, non-virtual backup machines in the cloud?
That's a great question. So the answer to that is, if we're talking about backing up data in the cloud, in our current scope, Veeam is a virtual-focused solution. But, I mentioned endpoint there at the end. So the things to know about endpoint is that it can back up Windows servers that are 2008 R2 and above. So if you have a server that exists in the cloud, you could potentially back it up with endpoint. What I'll tell you beyond that is, of course, we're adding a Linux-based solution that's server-focused. So again, if you have Linux instances in the cloud, that Linux solution may be well appropriated for that type of situation. And then lastly, as we kind of move into the enterprise even more and more, the benefit to the SMB is that Veeam's focus on physical as a whole is increasing. So things that we might need to back up something inside of a virtual machine that's in the cloud, but we don't have access to the host infrastructure. We might still be able to do that through some of the technologies we're building around physical. So I'd say watch this space. There are some things that we can do now as workarounds, but should get better over the time period of this year.
And then another question for you, Drew. It says, regarding the encryption mentioned in the SMB specific features, is that proprietary encryption, and what is the strength? And also, how about during transmission? Is it sent over SFTP or what?
Great question. So the answer to that is the encryption can be engaged at several different levels. First, to let you know, the strength is an AES 256 encryption, and that can be done in sort of a variety of different ways. So when we, for instance, when we'll go ahead and back up a file or back up a virtual machine, we'll have an opportunity there to engage encryption at rest. And that happens inline, so it's happening as the data is being backed up. That's inline encryption, and will take place and will be leaving the file encrypted at rest. We can also encrypt in transit. In fact, if we're using Cloud Connect, that's via an SSL connection. So there's several different places throughout the software that encryption is implemented, whether it's at rest or in transit there.
Perfect. Next question is for Aiden. Aiden, somebody asked, does Azure Stack have ASR feature as an option for on-prem?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I would say at this point probably not, but that is a pure guess. Sorry for that.
Nope. That's why they're questions, because people don't know the answers yet. If you have any other last questions, we'll leave the lines open here for another minute or so, or otherwise we will end the webinar. Yep, and it looks like nothing else has come in. Well, I want to thank everybody for logging in and watching this webinar presented by Petri and Veeam. If you have any other questions, you can find all of our contact information in these slides or on petri.com, and we'll be happy to answer anything you have. Thanks, guys.